The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Season 1, Episode 7, AAMCO. Beep, beep, beep. My thoughts on Jeff and Susie's thoughts coming up right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Yoel and so grateful to have you. And in today's video, I'm going to continue with my series on the wonderful series of Jeffrey Garlin and Susie Essman called The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And in today's video, we're going to discuss their thoughts on Curb Your Enthusiasm's Season 1, Episode 7, AAMCO. Beep, beep. And if you watch that episode, you'll see what I mean. And as I've mentioned in the earlier video, I started rewatching the episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm before I record these videos in order to refresh myself. Now I've just got to focus on not messing up my my notes, because my handwriting looks like a doctor's handwriting. I'm like looking at it and it's very hard to read. In any case, let's jump right in. So just various thoughts that I jotted down. I'm not going to really take you through the whole episode, but thoughts that came to me. And in one of the scenes, Larry's making fun of Cheryl's friend, who's saying that she really enjoyed his movie and the actors' impressions and their facial expressions. And Larry's like, oh, their facial expressions. And I just thought that was somewhat ironic, because we always talk about just how important facial expressions are to Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's Larry's facial expressions, it's Cheryl's facial expressions. It's more what's not on the page than what's on the page, which makes the show so funny, especially because there isn't a formal script. We know there's an outline, but there isn't an actual script. So it's funny to watch Larry David making fun of somebody appreciating facial expressions. That's very much what I appreciate about the show Curb Your Enthusiasm itself. Okay. Also, again, sort of out of order, I have two columns here. Okay, one column is my notes on the show, and the other is my notes on what Jeff and Susie are saying. And I wanted to point out that Jeff starts out the podcast by talking about how insecure or self-conscious he is about the way he looks and was when these earlier episodes were recorded. And again, I can really empathize with Jeff, but he's got nothing to worry about, because the fans aren't thinking about that. We were just enjoying the show, and Jeff was obviously a very integral part of the show. But it is interesting that he makes himself very vulnerable on this podcast on the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he talks about how self-conscious he is about watching himself on screen. And Larry has a great line in the show, which I thought is so true. I mean, everything, not everything, but virtually everything that he says on the show is so true. And that's why it's so relatable, where somebody can't do something for personal reasons. And Larry's like, what does that mean, personal reasons? That's like a get out of jail free card for anything. You can say whatever you want for personal reasons, and you never have to have any sort of responsibility for that. And I find that to be very true, because people tend to hear personal reasons like, oh, personal reasons, and they kind of give that space. But what does it mean? It really doesn't mean anything. Anything could be a personal reason. A personal reason could be, I don't want to go out with you. That's a personal reason. So I just wanted to underscore that I thought what Larry David said there was just really, really hilarious and true. And also the whole idea about dinner parties and Larry saying, why do you want them? It reminds me of my wife of yore. This was one of the challenges, if you will, that used to come up when I was married, that she's very much an extrovert and gets really energized by people and parties. And she always wanted to have guests over, dinner parties. And I had to kind of negotiate with her, like, okay, we'll do one this week, but we're not going to do one then for another 2 weeks. Or, if you do it today, we won't do it then, et cetera, et cetera. And Larry's also kind of negotiating with Cheryl. He really hates these dinner parties, and Cheryl really wants to do them. And then also in the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm video in the podcast, they also talk about the whole idea of having dinner parties and why anybody wants to have them. And also, it was interesting to me that Susie was saying about the whole idea of catering, that she would never cater for such an insignificant amount of people. I think there were 8 guests that Cheryl was catering for, and Susie was like, who caters for 8 guests? And you can really see Susie's a really down-to-earth New Yorker. Her fame and success hasn't taken away her down-to-earthness, and I really enjoy her commentary and seeing just how relatable and personable Susie is. Anyway, something else that struck me is that when Jeff on the show is telling Larry that he's offended that Larry didn't congratulate him on his new car, you can see that Jeff was kind of very pensive and nervous to do it. He has to sit down and talk to him like it's a very serious thing. And it just shows you that reverence that Jeff has for Larry on the show as well, because after all, Larry is his client. So as close friends as they're going to be, still there is that kind of client, that sort of client relationship, client-manager relationship that Jeff has with him. And on the show, it works. It's very natural to see that the manager wants to kind of tell off Larry, but not in the way that he usually would. and therefore he makes it into a whole production of like, let's sit down on the couch and I want to talk to you and I want to put this nicely. I just thought it was an interesting dynamic. I'm curious, I don't recall now if on the later episodes the character Jeff becomes more cavalier with the character Larry as the seasons progress, but certainly on the early on, you can see that sort of reverence that Jeff has for Larry. And then they get into the car, and this was interesting to me. Somebody beeps Larry while he's driving Jeff's brand new car, and Larry takes offense to it. And as a Canadian, I related to that. I always found it funny that, if you're in New York, everybody's beeping as a matter of course, right? Everybody's honking their horns. But in Canada, when people honk their horns, I have memories as a child, my mother would be like, who's honking me? Like looking around, people get really upset at the nerve of somebody who could honk their horn. As it happens, I always tell my kids, I don't think horns should be a weapon. Horns are there as a cautionary thing, to warn somebody of pending danger, or like, I'm approaching, you better watch out, please watch out, or whatnot. But when it comes to generally, if somebody's just using that horn as a weapon, I definitely know that Canadians take umbrage with it. It was interesting to see that Larry David, although he's a New Yorker on the show, all of a sudden he thinks somebody's honking him. Of course, it's the AAMCO commercial, the beep beep after the AAMCO, but he thinks somebody's honking at him and he really takes umbrage. It just really was relatable to me as a Canadian. As an aside, I said to my kids, I think it would be great if the horns were kind of made to sound like, like beep beep, excuse me, beep beep, like that. Imagine when somebody honked their horn, it came out as like, excuse me. It kind of would take away that kind of drive to use the horn as like an aggressive tool to let out anger. But that's a whole other side point. I also found it funny that as this whole episode is going on, the car gets crashed from behind. This like funny music, I hope I could find it to put it on this video. This funny music is continuing to go on in the background. This like, I don't know, I think it was like 50s style music. I think it was a 57 Chevy or whatever the car that Jeff had bought that they were riding in. And all while this is going on, and Jeff's upset and Larry's upset and everybody's annoyed and frustrated and aggravated, you've got this kind of funny 50s kind of like friendly music going on in the background the whole time. I thought Jeff and Susie would maybe talk about that, but they didn't on the episode. And this Larry and Susie and Jeff do kind of mention where the guy, I forgot his name, he's passed away. They talk about him in the episode, and he does a great job, the actor with the mustache, and he's the AAMCO guy. And he asks Larry if he gets paid every time a Seinfeld episode is run, which I just thought is so funny that Larry's willing to put that in the show. A lot of actors or people would be uncomfortable with the whole idea of salary coming up, but obviously it's no secret that Seinfeld was enormously successful and a financial bonanza for Larry David. So he's not about to hide that. It's reality. And the fact that he puts that into the show to the point where the guy's asking him that kind of inane question or personal question at a dinner party is pretty comical, I found. And also, Susie talked about how they were referencing the Seinfeld show a lot early on in the earliest episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And here's another episode yet again where Seinfeld is getting referenced. So I just wanted to throw that in. Another great line that I loved, I just cherry picked from the show, is that I've spent my whole career being unprofessional. That's what Larry David said. I've spent my whole career being unprofessional. Just thought that was a gold line. And again, I was hoping maybe Susie and Jeff would talk about that, but that's more into the nitty gritty of getting into the show's lines. There's so many one-liners that you can pick up on, but that's something I noted down in my notes. And I also noticed that when, the caterer walks away with the food and Larry and Cheryl are very upset, Cheryl is particularly upset, and you see that Cheryl gets really tough. She's like, you better go after that caterer and get our food back. She is really upset about it. And, I think Cheryl does a great job really expressing her outrage and doing it in a very nondescript way. Cheryl is just a wonderful actor. And as I go through these episodes of the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm, I'm seeing that more and more. As I watch the shows again, I'm appreciating, the talent of Cheryl Hines more and more. And I understand, more why Larry David cast her as his wife on the show. His wife at this point in the episodes anyways. We'll see what happens later on. And then Larry goes to, recover the food that the caterer took. And she just blatantly lies about giving it to a homeless shelter. And the homeless man had come into the beginning of the show where he turns down some food, a tuna sandwich that Larry has. He says he doesn't like tuna, which is also amazing. And Jeff has a great story about that, being somewhat similar to something that happened to him when he had offered food to a homeless person and the person turned it down because they didn't like it. So that actually features its way into the show. And this caterer just blatantly lies to Larry. I gave it to a homeless person. And then minutes later, her employee walks in and says, what do you want me to do with this food? So it's pretty comical to watch somebody being caught in a lie. And Larry's response to her is great. You know, like, why don't you go buy yourself another apple turnover? And he's like, I did. I bought them yesterday and somebody took it from us. He's just so upset. And again, you see him like dripping with sarcasm. I talked about that in the last video where he drips with sarcasm at the guy's wife with the wire when she invites him for a casserole. Like, I would love to, but I can't. So here too, you can just see Larry is like dripping with sarcasm, and he just does an amazing job as always. And also, just going a bit back in time, I noticed in my notes here about Susie and Jeff talking about the inane dinner conversation that's going on in the show. And that's part of why I never, I don't want to say I never enjoyed dinner parties. I do enjoy dinner parties, but my thing is that it should be to a certain limit. Like these, I found that we would have dinner parties, they would go on and on and on and go on forever. And you reach a point where it's like, there's really nothing more to talk about. Like now we're just talking about stupidity. And also, again, because depending on the guest that you would have, the conversation will be based on those guests that you're having. So it's interesting that they talk about the inane discussion as being very real to dinner parties that oftentimes happen where the discussion is not really that stimulating. And you see Larry is kind of like doing his best, but he's not really having a good time, which ends up paying off for him at the end, as we know at the end of the episode. And yeah, it's great. Jeff talks about this, how he sees Larry as Larry walks into his kitchen, which is great, by the way. Like Larry just walks into Jeff's kitchen. Like, how does that happen? I don't remember the episode showing Larry, being invited in by Susie or anything. He just strolls in and there's Jeff sitting at the table eating his chicken. And Jeff said it was great that Jeff added that he loves to say, hey, how Jeff does that in real life. And he kind of incorporated that into the show, but Larry asked him not to do it for the show. And Jeff is saying how much that bothers him. And I just thought it was a funny scene to watch the culprit, so to speak, Jeff, who's eating the chicken there unabashedly, and Larry walks in and he's caught red-handed. There was a lot of caught red-handeds here. We had the caterer blatantly lying and then caught red-handed, and then we have Jeff caught red-handed with the chicken that Larry had paid for and used with his own, and that Larry had paid for to cater for his own dinner party. Also, some funny notes here. Susie at one point said that there's the shidduch was made with AAMCO. Shidduch, by the way, she didn't say this, but anybody who is of the Jewish faith will know shidduch means to put two people together, like matchmaking. So what Susie was saying there was that there was a match made between the AAMCO guy who was going to fix the car, and Larry David, and Susie referred to it as a shidduch. I thought that was hilarious and wanted to point that out. And many people watching the History of Curb Your Enthusiasm podcast may have wondered, like, what did she just say? So hopefully if you're watching this, now you know what Susie said. And again, I just want to say it's really delightful to use Jeff's terms about how open and vulnerable and honest he is, and just how much of a good guy he is. Jeff, yes, I know I've been seeing the comments where people are saying that he cuts off Susie too much. You know what? He was very upfront about ADHD and whatnot, and Susie doesn't feel threatened by it. Susie can hold her own, both as Jeff's wife in the show and also as Jeff's podcasting partner in the History of Curb Your Enthusiasm. But Jeff is actually really just a wonderful person. And even if he is cutting off Susie, he's not doing it in a mean-spirited or a sort of annoying or aggressive way, at least not the way I see it. I just find Jeff to be a delight to watch. The things he says are just fantastic and funny and interesting. And as well as Susie, they're both great hosts. Oh, by the way, I'm like coughing away from the mic. I may or may not edit that out, but if I do, the reason I'm editing is because I'm coughing like right into my mic. So that's it for my thoughts on Jeff and Susie's thoughts, as well as the episode itself of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Season 1, Episode 7, AAMCO, beep, beep, as well as the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm on that episode. Hope you found that entertaining, maybe even insightful. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to see that. The comments and feedback have been picking up on my channel. The subscribers have been increasing. I am so thrilled about that. I'm very grateful. If you have subscribed, thank you. If you have not yet subscribed, I'd be very grateful if you did so. It definitely helps me, but it will also help you not miss a future video. If you have any feedback about any sort of videos you'd like me to do, I actually got a few comments today from people asking me to do some videos, not in this context, more in the consciousness Michael Singer videos that I've been doing, which you can see in my video library. But if there's any sort of videos that you'd be interested in having me do, I'd be happy to entertain that within reason. And once again, I'm grateful that you came to my channel. And until next time, looking forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I've got plenty more in my videos library. If there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to address it. If you can like the video, I'd be very grateful. As well, if you subscribed, you'd be helping me out. You'd also be helping yourself out to not miss a future video. Thanks so much. Have a great day.